Kitchen light was still on when Jolene Ashby came home from her shift at the elementary school, which was strange because Raymond never stayed up past 9. She noticed the boxes first, 3 of them stacked by the front door, her own handwriting on the sides. Winter clothes, books, kitchen Miss Gore. Boxes she'd packed herself 2 years ago when they moved in together and never fully unpacked. Beside them sat her rolling suitcase, the burgundy one with the broken zipper she kept meaning to fix. Raymond was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, his phone face down in front of him. He didn't look up when she walked in. "Raymond." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "What's happening? I need you to take your things and go." He said it the way he said everything, calm, measured, like he was explaining a math problem. "I've thought about it for a long time. This isn't working." Jolene set down her bag slowly. She'd been on her feet for 9 hours. She'd read 4 books aloud to a class of 2nd graders, helped a little boy named Marcus tie his shoes for the 3rd time that week, stayed late to help a parent understand why her daughter was struggling with reading. She was tired down to the cartilage. "This isn't working," she repeated. "That's all you're going to give me?" Raymond finally looked at her. There was no anger in his face. That almost made it worse. "We've been growing apart for a long time. You know it as well as I do." "I don't know that. I don't know that at all. I thought we were just busy. I thought we were going to talk about it." "I don't want to talk about it. I want to move forward." She looked at the boxes again. Her books. Her winter coat was probably in one of those bags. It was February. "Raymond, it's 34 degrees outside. You can stay at a hotel tonight." He stood pushing his chair back. "I'll cover it. First week's hotel, then you're on your own." "I think that's fair." Fair. The word landed like something dropped from a height. "We've been together for 6 years. We've been engaged for 2. Fair." "Jolene, don't." She held up one hand. "Just don't." She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry. She picked up her purse, left her school bag by the door because it was heavy and she couldn't carry everything, and dragged the rolling suitcase down the porch steps one at a time. The wheel stuck on the bottom step, and she yanked it harder than she meant to, and it scraped across the concrete with a sound like something tearing. The street was dark and cold. Mrs. Okafor from across the way had her porch light on, and Jolene could see the curtain shift slightly in the front window. She wasn't going to look over there. She wasn't going to give the neighborhood anything else to look at. She made it to the end of the driveway before she stopped. She had $280 in her checking account. Her next paycheck wasn't until Friday. It was Tuesday night. A car slowed at the edge of the driveway. Not a car she recognized. A dark green pickup truck, the older kind, well-maintained. The window came down. "Ms. Ashby?" She turned. The man behind the wheel was in his late 40s, silver at the temples, dressed like he'd come from somewhere that required a button-down shirt. It took her a moment. "Mr. Calloway." Her voice was unsteady. "Principal Calloway." Wallace Calloway had been principal of Riverside Elementary for 11 years. Jolene had worked under him for 4 of them. He was the kind of administrator who remembered every teacher's name, showed up at school plays, wrote his own notes on evaluation forms instead of using the district template. He was also Raymond's former college roommate, which was how Jolene had gotten the job interview in the first place. A fact she had always been slightly uncomfortable about. He was looking at her standing on the sidewalk in February with a suitcase, and his expression was doing something careful and kind that she didn't have the energy to process. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Automatic. "I'm just..." She stopped. She was not fine. She was standing outside the house she'd lived in for 2 years with one suitcase and no plan, and her coat was inside one of those boxes. "Is that Raymond's house?" He said it quietly, not like an accusation. "It was mine too." Wallace turned off the engine. That wasn't what she expected him to do. He got out of the truck and stood on the sidewalk, and he was taller than she remembered from the hallways at school, where everything had its own sense of scale. "You need somewhere to go tonight." "I was going to figure that out." She tightened her grip on the suitcase handle. "I don't need. My sister has an apartment above the garage," he said. "She moved out last spring and I haven't rented it. It's heated, it's furnished, it's yours for as long as you need it, no charge." He said it the way he said things at staff meetings, straightforward, no excess. "I was going to call Raymond this week anyway. There's something we need to discuss regarding your position at the school." She didn't understand what that meant. She was too cold to ask. "I'll follow you," she said, because she had to say something. "Your car is here?" She'd taken a rideshare home because her car was at the mechanic's. She'd forgotten about that. She'd forgotten about everything that had existed before she walked through the front door 40 minutes ago. "Come on," he said, and opened the passenger door. She got in. She didn't know what else to do. The apartment above the garage was one large room with a kitchen along one wall and a pull-out couch that Wallace said his sister had replaced with an actual bed frame before she left. It was warm. There were dishes in the cabinet and dish soap by the sink and 3 extra blankets in the closet, folded in thirds. "I'll get the rest of your boxes tomorrow," he said. "You don't have to do that. I know." He set a spare key on the counter. "Sleep. We'll talk in the morning." She stood in the middle of the room after he left and listened to his footsteps cross the gravel driveway and the sound of his back door opening and closing. Then she sat down on the floor because she didn't trust herself to make it to the bed. 6 years. She'd spent 6 years being Raymond Holt's partner, and, for the last 2, his fiancée. And somewhere in those 6 years, she'd let everything that was hers alone, her savings account, her Thursday nights, her friendships, her sense of what she was supposed to want from her life, slowly migrate into the space that was his. She hadn't noticed it happening. That was the part she kept circling back to. She hadn't noticed. She pulled out her phone. 14 missed calls from Raymond, which was surprising since he'd been the one to pack her boxes. She deleted them without listening. A text from her friend Priya in Cincinnati. "Call me when you can." Priya lived 4 states away and hadn't known anything about tonight, which meant the universe had a particular kind of joke in mind. She called Priya. "Joe." Priya picked up on the first ring. "I was just thinking about you." "What's wrong?" Raymond ended the engagement. She said it out loud for the first time, tonight. "I came home and my boxes were by the door." There was a silence, and then Priya said, very precisely, "I will drive there." "You don't need to." "I will drive there and I will." "Priya." "At minimum," Priya said. "I need you to tell me you are somewhere warm and safe." "I'm in a garage apartment." She looked around. "It's actually nicer than I thought it would be." "Whose garage apartment?" "My principal's." Another silence, longer this time. "That's a story," Priya said finally. "There's a lot I don't understand yet." Jolene lay back on the floor. The ceiling was painted the same off-white as every other ceiling she'd ever known. "I'll figure it out in the morning." She slept 11 hours, which she hadn't done since college. In the morning, Wallace knocked on the door at 8 with a paper bag from the bakery 3 blocks over and 2 coffees. He sat at the small table by the window while she ate a blueberry muffin and tried to feel like a person. "I need to tell you something about Raymond," he said. "I was going to reach out this week because of it, and then I drove past the house last night and—" He stopped. "Well, what about Raymond? He came to see me last month, to my office on a Saturday." Wallace wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "He told me that he was concerned about your performance at work, that you'd been distracted, making mistakes, that some parents had expressed concerns." Jolene set down her muffin. "None of that is true." "I know. I pulled every evaluation, every parent communication, every observation report from the last 3 years. You're one of the best teachers we have. Whatever Raymond told me, it wasn't about what's happening in your classroom." The reveal about Raymond's calm face at the kitchen table. Calm like a decision already made. He was trying to get me fired. He was laying groundwork. Whether it was for a custody situation, an asset dispute, I don't know. But he came to me with a story that wasn't true, and I wanted to understand why before I said anything to you. Wallace looked at her steadily. "I'm sorry it took me this long." Jolene's fingers had gone cold around her coffee cup. 6 years. She'd spent 6 years inside a life that had been quietly being arranged against her. She spent the rest of that morning in the apartment going through her phone, her email, her memory. She and Raymond had shared an email account for household things, utility bills, the mortgage, insurance. She still knew the password. She opened it from her laptop, not knowing exactly what she was looking for, and found it anyway. There were emails going back a year. Raymond to a woman named Petra. Not explicit at first. Careful, plausibly friendly, but the timestamps didn't lie. Lunch meetings on days he told Jolene he was traveling for work. Hotel receipts from cities he'd claimed were conference locations. A message from 3 months ago. "I know this is taking longer than we planned." She's more settled than I thought she'd be. Give me until spring. Until spring. Jolene read it twice. The coldness she felt wasn't grief. It was the specific, clarifying cold of understanding something completely. She took screenshots of everything. She downloaded the emails to her laptop. She opened a new notebook. She always had notebooks. She was a teacher. And started writing a timeline. Dates, amounts, claims Raymond had made that she could now match to receipts that said something different. She found the joint account statements. Raymond had transferred $11,000 out over the past 8 months. Small movements at first, then larger. The same way a door swings slowly and then all at once. She found paperwork for a credit card she'd never seen. Bills he'd been paying from an account she wasn't on. A lease application submitted 3 months ago for an apartment on the other side of the city. 1 bedroom, 2 names on the application. By the time Wallace knocked again at noon to ask if she needed lunch, she had filled 4 pages in the notebook. I need a lawyer, she said. He didn't look surprised. I know someone. She's good. She used to do school district litigation, switched to family law about 6 years ago. Her name is Anita Forsyth. He paused. She'll want to see documentation. Jolene held up the notebook. I have documentation. Anita Forsyth's office was on the 2nd floor of a building downtown that had once been a bank. She was a compact woman in her early 60s with close-cropped natural hair and the kind of stillness that made you feel like she'd already considered every possible outcome of the conversation before you walked in. She reviewed Jolene's documentation without speaking for a long time. He filed a lease application under both names, she said finally. That's interesting. Did you sign anything? Not that I know of. But he's done things I didn't know about before. Fair point. Anita made a note. The transfers out of the joint account are the most important thing right now. You have standing on this, those are marital assets even though you weren't married yet, depending on how the engagement was structured and your state's cohabitation statutes. She looked up. Do you own the house jointly? My name is on the mortgage. We split the down payment, so he can't just keep the house. He told me I could find somewhere else to go. Anita's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. He told you a lot of things that weren't true, she said. Let's start making a list of the true things. She filed the paperwork that afternoon. An injunction to freeze the joint accounts, a formal separation of assets, documentation of the financial transfers. She also sent a letter to Raymond's workplace. He worked in insurance, managed a team of 12, noting that Jolene was represented by counsel and that any contact outside of formal legal channels would be treated accordingly. That evening, Raymond called 37 times. Jolene blocked him on everything except the channel Anita had designated for official communication, and then she went for a walk around the block because she needed to feel the ground under her feet. The cold had let up slightly. There were crocuses coming up at the edge of a yard 2 houses down from Wallace's. She stood there looking at them for a long time, which felt dramatic and also completely necessary. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. You think you're so smart. He was miserable with you. You know that, right? He told me every day how unhappy he was. You should be thanking me for finally ending it. Jolene read it twice. She screenshotted it and forwarded it to Anita without responding. Then she blocked the number. She went back to the apartment and sat at the small table and let herself feel, for exactly 20 minutes, all of the things she'd been holding off, the embarrassment of the neighbors, the boxes by the door, the phrase "give me until spring" like she was a lease he was waiting to let expire. She let herself feel all of it. Then she opened her laptop and started reading about cohabitation law. The legal process moved faster than she expected and slower than she wanted. Raymond apparently had not anticipated that Jolene would have documentation or counsel. He'd anticipated a woman too hurt and too tired to fight back. That was the version of Jolene he'd been counting on. He tried 3 things in rapid succession. First, he claimed she'd been emotionally unstable during their relationship and unable to fulfill basic responsibilities. The same groundwork he'd tried to lay at school, now in a legal filing. Anita picked it apart in a written response so thorough and precise that Jolene read it 3 times just to appreciate the craftsmanship. Second, he claimed the money in the joint account had been his earnings, not shared assets. Anita produced 4 years of Jolene's tax returns and her direct deposit records. She had contributed to that account every single month for the duration of their cohabitation. The number wasn't small. Third, and this was the part Jolene hadn't expected, He told people at their mutual circle that she was involved with Wallace, that she'd been having an affair with her married employer, and that was why she'd ended up at his property the night of the breakup. Wallace was not married. He'd been divorced for 3 years. Jolene knew this because it had come up at a staff meeting in the context of health insurance changes, not because of anything personal between them. When she told Anita, Anita sighed once, briefly, and then got back to work. "He's grasping," Anita said. "When people have no real defense, they attack the credibility of the other party. It means we're winning." It didn't feel like winning. It felt like watching someone throw everything they had at the wall because they'd run out of real ammunition. Wallace addressed it once, directly. He called a meeting with the school district's HR office, explained that he had offered Jolene housing as an emergency measure and that the arrangement was professional in nature, and offered his own documentation: the garage apartment lease terms, the separate entrances, the fact that he'd been in contact with the district's housing resource coordinator about the situation from the beginning. He was methodical about it. He didn't seem rattled. Afterwards in the hallway he said to Jolene, "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," she said honestly. "I've also been worse. The district will stand behind you. I've made that clear. You didn't have to do any of this." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother was in a situation similar to yours, 20-some years ago. She had 3 kids and a husband who'd moved the money somewhere she couldn't find it, and nobody helped her. It took her years to untangle it on her own." He glanced down the hallway. "I can't undo that. I can't undo that. I can help you." The hearing was on a Tuesday morning, a cold one later that spring. Jolene wore a gray dress she'd bought with her own money 3 years before she'd ever met Raymond. She'd worn it to parent-teacher nights and curriculum presentations and one award ceremony where 2 of her students had been recognized by the district. It was a dress that belonged entirely to her. Raymond arrived with his lawyer and with Petra, who sat in the back row of the gallery and crossed her arms and stared at Jolene with the particular expression of someone who believed her presence there was an act of loyalty. Anita had warned her, "He's going to try to make this about your character. Don't take the bait. Answer the question asked, nothing more." The judge was a man named Howard Brennan, mid-50s, who had clearly read the filings thoroughly and had the look of someone running short on patience with one of the parties in the room. Raymond's attorney went first. He described Jolene as financially dependent, emotionally erratic, and unwilling to accept the natural end of a relationship that had run its course. He described the joint account transfers as Raymond's own earnings being moved into his own accounts for legitimate financial planning purposes. He described Wallace Calloway as a third party who had inserted himself into a private matter for personal reasons. Judge Brennan wrote something down. Then Anita stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She laid out 4 years of financial records, 11 months of email documentation from the shared account, the timeline of transfers, Raymond's visit to the school to undermine Jolene's professional standing, the lease application with Petra's name co-signed 2 months before he packed Jolene's boxes. She put the text message from Petra on the screen. She noted that Raymond had attempted to contact Jolene via 37 calls in a single evening after being informed she had legal representation. When it was Jolene's turn on the stand, Raymond's attorney asked her whether she'd been romantically involved with her employer. "No," she said. "You moved into his property within hours of leaving Mr. Holt's residence. He offered emergency housing when I had nowhere to go. I accepted. That's the full extent of it. Isn't it convenient that your employer happened to be—" He was driving past. Jolene kept her voice steady. "He'd been planning to contact me that week anyway regarding a false report Raymond had filed about my job performance. He saw me standing on the sidewalk at 9 o'clock at night with a suitcase. He stopped." She paused. "Most people would have kept driving. He didn't." Raymond's attorney moved on. He didn't have anywhere else to go with it. When they called Raymond to the stand, Anita was brief and precise. "Mr. Raymond Holt, you transferred $11,000 out of the joint account between last April and this February. Is that correct?" "I moved some funds for investment purposes into an account with only your name on it. It was my money." Ms. Ashby's direct deposits contributed 43% of all funds deposited into that joint account over 4 years. Is that consistent with your understanding of your money? Raymond's jaw tightened. "I earned more than she did. $67,000 a year to her 52, Anita said. "That difference doesn't make her contributions disappear, Mr. Holt. It makes them significant." She pulled up another document. "You filed a report with Riverside Elementary's principal claiming Ms. Ashby was performing poorly in her role. Is that correct?" I had concerns that weren't based on any documented evidence and which the school's own records contradicted entirely. Why did you file that report? I was worried about her. You filed a report designed to jeopardize her employment 1 month before you asked her to leave your shared home. Does that timeline seem coincidental to you? Raymond's attorney objected. Anita withdrew the question. She'd already made the point. Judge Brennan took a recess of 40 minutes. When he came back, he looked at Raymond with the expression of a man who had heard every version of this particular story and found none of them convincing. This court finds that the transfers made from the joint account constitute misappropriation of shared assets, he said. Mr. Holt is ordered to return the full amount within 60 days. The equity in the shared property will be divided equally, with Ms. Ashby given the option to purchase Mr. Holt's share or liquidate at her election. Mr. Holt's report to Ms. Ashby's employer is noted in this record as evidence of a pattern of conduct intended to economically and professionally disadvantage Ms. Ashby. He set down the papers. Ms. Ashby, you're owed what you're owed. This court intends to make sure you get it. In the hallway afterward, Raymond tried to approach her. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, which was probably true. His suit was the good one, the charcoal gray she'd helped him pick out for his sister's wedding 3 years ago, and it hung on him differently now. Jolene. His voice had lost the careful calm. Can we just 5 minutes? No. She said it without heat, the way you'd tell a student that wasn't the right answer, matter of fact and final. I know I handled this badly. You planned it for a year, she said. You moved money, you filed a false report, you had a lease signed with someone else before you even told me it was over. That's not handling something badly. That's a choice you made repeatedly over a long time. She picked up her bag. We're done, Raymond. Threw Anita for everything else. She walked out of the courthouse and into air that had finally, after months, started to smell like spring. Wallace was waiting on the steps. He hadn't come inside. He hadn't been a party to anything, and Jolene hadn't asked him to be, but he was there in his jacket with his hands in his pockets, and he straightened when he saw her face. You won, he said. I won. He nodded once, like something had been confirmed that he'd been reasonably sure of. Lunch? Yes, she said. Absolutely yes. 6 months after the hearing, Jolene bought the share of the house that had been Raymond's. She hadn't expected to want to stay there, but when she sat with the decision, she realized that what she'd wanted all along was the house itself, the garden she'd planted, the bedroom she'd repainted twice, the kitchen where she'd figured out how to make bread during a bad winter. Raymond had never particularly cared about any of it. She was the one who'd made it a place to live in. She repainted the front door bright yellow because she'd always wanted it yellow, and Raymond had said it was too much. It was a little much, honestly. She loved it. She stayed in the garage apartment until July, paying Wallace a reduced rent that he'd had to argue her into accepting. By the time she moved back into her own house, she and Wallace had developed the kind of friendship that forms between people who've seen each other in real circumstances, not the polished professional versions, but the actual ones, tired and uncertain and trying anyway. They had dinner occasionally. They argued about books. He came to her classroom's end-of-year celebration and sat in a chair sized for an 8-year-old and ate a cupcake decorated with a caterpillar. And Jolene's student Marcus, who still couldn't tie his shoes reliably, declared him pretty cool for a grown-up. Wallace looked like that might have been the best review he'd ever received. She didn't know what to call what they were becoming. She wasn't in a hurry to find out. At the start of the new school year, she got an email from a woman named Rosa who worked at the district's Family Resource Center. She'd heard about Jolene's situation, vaguely, not in detail, and wanted to know if she'd be willing to speak at an evening workshop for educators and families about recognizing financial control in relationships. Jolene read the email 3 times. Then she wrote back yes. The workshop was a Thursday evening in October. She stood at the front of a conference room with 12 people in folding chairs and talked about the joint account and the transferred money and the false report filed at her workplace, and she talked about what it felt like to come home to boxes by the door and have nowhere to go. And she talked about being wrong about how alone she was, about the neighbor who could have kept driving, about the lawyer who laid out the truth so clearly that a judge could follow every thread. She didn't say it was easy. It wasn't. She didn't say she'd known what she was doing every step of the way. She mostly hadn't. She said, the thing he counted on was that I wouldn't fight. He spent a year making sure I'd have less money, a weaker professional position, fewer options. He built a cage and I didn't see it because I was busy living inside it. She looked at the room. The moment I started writing things down, dates, amounts, what I knew and when I knew it, that's when the cage stopped working. Documentation is boring. It's also the most powerful thing I did. Afterward, 2 women waited while the others filed out. One of them was a school counselor. The other was a mother whose daughter was in the district. They both had the look Jolene was learning to recognize, something careful and slightly held in, like they were deciding whether to say the real thing. She stayed for another hour. Driving home, she passed the house with the crocuses she'd noticed the first week. There were mums in the same spot now, orange and rust-colored, the fall version of hope. She thought about Raymond occasionally. She'd heard through people they'd both known that he and Petra had broken up, that he'd moved to a smaller apartment, that he was managing a smaller team. She didn't feel satisfied by this exactly. She didn't feel much of anything, which she eventually understood was the same as being free. What she felt, going home to the yellow door and the garden she'd kept alive through all of it, was that she'd gotten something back that she hadn't known she'd lost, herself as the protagonist of her own life, not a supporting character in someone else's. Her second graders were reading independently now, most of them. 2 of them had started their own books. Marcus had finally, on a Tuesday afternoon in September, tied his shoes on his own, and then looked up at her with the expression of someone who has accomplished something that seemed impossible and now understands that it wasn't. "I did it, Ms. Ashby," he said. "You did," she said. She meant about the shoes. She was also thinking about something else.